Anton Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise at this point to oppose the bill this morning as introduced by the Honourable Member for Hayes and Harlington. I believe, in fact, on parts and the ethos and some of the principles that he's put this morning, I do share one of two common interests with the Honourable Member. As I understand, through my constituency of Great Yarmouth, where he attended local grammar school in his formative years, and I'm sure he still holds our town in great affection, as do I, as its Member of a Parliament, as well as his principle behind, I believe, his reason for bringing this bill, which is to make sure there is full and proper scrutiny and open and transparent approach to the appointment of such an important position. However, I fear that that, in principle, is probably the only thing, at least for this morning, that the Honourable Member and myself are likely to agree upon, as I disagree with the introduction of this bill in the sense that I believe it threatens the direct parliamentary interference in the appointment of the Governor of the Bank of England, and unnecessarily, through that, jeopardises the wider political independence of the Bank of England itself. And I think there are two levels, particularly, which I want to address this morning, some of which has already been commented on, in the way in which this bill approaches the problem. Firstly, is the question whether this bill is the right mechanism, in fact, and the way it goes about looking at an appointment, and I will come to that in a few moments. And secondly, the effect that a change of this type would have into the way that a select committee works, and in fact the role of a select committee. As a member of the Work and Pensions Select Committee, I fully appreciate the scrutiny role that a committee performs, and on our committee we have also looked at appointments and given comment on appointments. And I have to say in our committee there has not yet been, to my knowledge, a great cry for the ability to have the direct power of veto or indeed appointment, but simply that it is important we have a chance as a committee to interview, take a view and make clear our view of a particular appointment. I understand that this bill was drafted in response to the comments made from a wider circle, including the Treasury Select Committee itself, to have a greater say in the appointment of the Governor of the Bank of England. And this has arisen partly through the extension of powers provided by the current Financial Services Bill. That bill itself is currently, as we know, being examined in committee in another place at this very moment, and I'm sure that there will be comment during that parliamentary scrutiny about any need or not for direct parliamentary involvement in the appointment of the Governor of the Bank of England. I'm sure there will be. Yes, I'm happy to give.
Just give some assistance to my honourable friend into the House, because this was debated in the other place recently, and the noble Lord MacFall actually withdrew his amendment suggesting the TSC should have this role, and recognised that many in the other place said they thought this was going far too far.
I thank my honourable friend, the Minister, for that intervention. I think it highlights the fact that in another place where this has been looked at and in depth, there has been a view that this bill and what this bill is trying to achieve may not be the right way forward, because when considering whether the current non-statutory arrangements for scrutinising the appointment of the Governor, as well as the Deputy Governors, are adequate, their Lordships will have considered and will be looking at that in light of the extensive new powers provided for in the bill, that the Treasury Select Committee may or may not require a more formal role in the process, and clearly have made a comment on that. That process and involvement would require legislation to enshrine it in law, and of course the bill before us today endeavours to formalise that process within the law. I'm sure the Honourable Member for Hayes and Harlington will be monitoring and will have read carefully the deliberations of the Lordships in committee to see if there are any pronouncements in favour of the course of action that he seeks to take, and the course of action that thus far they have seemed to take in the view, as we've just heard from the Minister, is not necessarily appropriate. However, I will also listen carefully to the views today and the views expressed by members in another place. At the moment, I have to say my mind is set that this bill would introduce an interference rather than a strengthening of the scrutiny of the Select Committee. I believe that the current system, as used for non-statutory hearings that precede the appointment of members of the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England, is working and should continue to be used for the appointment of the Governor of the Bank of England. The Treasury Select Committee has held those hearings from 1997 onwards, and they have effectively been hearings that have carefully scrutinised, reviewed and given comment on appointees. During those hearings, members of the Select Committee have disagreed with the Governor's nominee. In fact, they urged, in fact, the then Chancellor of the Exchequer to think again about the appointment of the economist Christopher Allsop to the Monetary Policy Committee. Well known in some circles for his flexibility on policy, the Right Honourable Member for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath promptly took no notice of the recommendation of the Select Committee and went forward. That was his ministerial prerogative, as he was exercising the powers that he is given as a member of the Executive. And indeed, a Treasury Select Committee report after that incident was still able to observe that the hearings played an important role nonetheless. In a parliamentary democracy, it is right for ministers to make executive decisions, and it is also right for Parliament to scrutinise those decisions. And I stress the word scrutinise. There is a clear line of differential in the current structure between the Executive and the Parliament's ability and role in scrutinising. And I think that is one that we should protect. I think it would be wrong for select committees to have an effective executive power. A change of this type would create an executive power for a select committee in an appointment. And as I said earlier on, happy to give one.
Thank you very much. I'm in huge agreement with my honourable friend, because I think he's making exactly the point that if a select committee is involved in decision making, no matter how slightly, it becomes less inclined or less able to be ruthlessly scrutinise the decisions and outcomes. So I think that's exactly correct. Does he agree?
I do agree with my honourable friend, and I think one of the problems, as I noted a few moments ago, with this bill as it stands, is actually that it focuses on one appointment from one select committee. I think what would be more interesting is a debate in this House about the role of select committees in the appointments that they are scrutinising and the appointments of public bodies, and I'll turn to that in just a few moments. But to do it for one committee, yes, happy to give way.
Is the member therefore saying that Parliament got it wrong in relation to the Office of Budget Responsibility?
I'm not saying that at all. I thank the honourable member for his intervention. I will turn to that very point if he'll bear with me in just a few moments. But I would stress, no, that's not the point I'm making. I think there is a very clear difference between a role and the appointment in the OBR to that of a position that has executive powers and executive decisions. And I do think if this was a bill that was looking at the role of select committees, there would be a useful and interesting debate to have around whether select committees should have a power of appointment or veto. But that would, of course, apply to all committees equally and all appointments equally, particularly where they have an executive role. I think that is a very important delineation that we have to be aware of. And also, I think it would be wrong to give one particular select committee, as important as the Treasury Select Committee has, a power, an executive appointment power, over and above that of other select committees that I'm sure would take the view stand in equal power and importance in this House in the role they fulfil, but through that would potentially be put into a second category of select committee and would effectively create a level of divisions of different types of select committee, which would again impede the function of all select committees. Happy to give way.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way? The Public Administration Select Committee had a debate in relation to executive agencies and appointments. The Public Accounts Committee have included the chairman in the appointment of the Controller and Auditor General. The Treasury Select Committee has developed the chairmanship of the Statistics Commission. In other words, there is piecemeal change going on. Does not the honourable gentleman accept that this is part of this piecemeal change and that we ought to give this bill a second reading, not so that we can pass exactly what's in the terms of the bill at the present time, but so that Parliament can have an honourable debate about the arrangements between the executive and the legislature in terms of major appointments?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. I think he makes a very, very strong point. I don't entirely agree, because I do think there is, as I say, and I will touch on this in a few moments, a clear difference between the type of appointments we're talking about and the role that those appointees then take on and the powers they have in how the select committees deal with them. I do, however, think there is a very good argument to make around this House looking at what role select committees have in what appointments and how they have that power, what that power is and what level it sits. And that, I think, would be a very good issue to bring forward. Perhaps I sat yesterday for business questions. The honourable member would like to come to business questions one week and make the case to the Leader of the House for some time in debate, or a backbench business debate. So, I give way. I'm sorry. or to make a case for the Backbench Business Committee. I do think, however, there is a difference here, and the Honourable Member for Hayes and Harlington, in his opening remarks, made the case around the fact that a private member's bill, bills like this, part of their aim, part of their target, is to get the government to listen, to hear a message, to take a view. And today's debate, with the points being made, no doubt will be heard, and the Minister is here and will hear the points being made, and will have heard various arguments from various members around the role that a select committee has over its power or lack of power to appoint or make a veto, and can take that into account as part of the government's plans going forward. Well, that's quite different to whether this bill today should have a second reading when, as I say, for me it has a fundamental flaw in giving a priority and special treatment to just one select committee over and above others. And I certainly, from the Work and Pensions Select Committee point of view, as great a respect as I have for the Treasury Select Committee and all of its members, would not feel fair to say that it should have a priority or an ability to be seen in a Premier League above any other select committee. The Treasury Select Committee itself is attempting and has argued for a role in appointing the Governor of the Bank of England by using, as the Honourable Gentleman just has, the comparison of the Budget of Responsibility Office and the National Audit Act of 2011 as a precedent. These provisions in that Act give a statutory role, I do agree, to the committee in making an appointment of the Chairman of the Office of Budget Responsibility. Additionally, as commented on, they give a statutory role to the Public Accounts Committee when a new Comptroller or Auditor General is appointed. However, and the point I was making, is that this argument does ignore a fundamental and crucial difference between the roles undertaken by those different organisations and the role undertaken by the Governor of the Bank of England. The Bank of England is actually setting policy. And whilst the Office of Budget Responsibility is important, it primarily has an analytical or forecasting role, not an executive ability to set policy, certainly monetary policy. It is providing independent information to government. That information is a powerful tool for Parliament to use in its scrutiny role. It is right, therefore, that Parliament is to protect that role from political interference. The government's position on this issue, I think, has been sensibly pragmatic. The government continues and has openly encouraged the involvement of the Treasury Select Committee in the appointment of the Governor of the Bank of England. I think it's actually been interesting to hear today from two different speakers about the private views of the Chairman of the Select Committee, the Honourable Member for Chichester, in his comment that actually what he thinks the Treasury Select Committee are looking for is that ability to have a very clear and open influence on the role, which also indicates that there is not necessarily a strong view from the Chair, and it's a shame he's not in his place, but I know he made a comment earlier, to actually have the power of veto or appointment, and I think that's a very, very important distinction from such an eminent member of this House, who would actually indeed be the Chairman at this point in time, benefiting from any change. The government, in doing that, I think has made a commitment and has set out in the coalition agreement, in fact, words that say we will strengthen the powers of select committees to scrutinise major public appointments. And the key word for me in that clause is scrutinise. That emphasises a right to scrutinise, a right to examine, challenge, query or inspect closely and thoroughly the appointment to major public bodies, and my select committee has done that as well. It does, however, make no mention of a right to appoint or veto, and I think quite rightly so, as already commented on by my honourable member for Wimbledon, the member for Wimbledon earlier this morning. That would be a substantial constitutional change to the way that select committees work. And my concern is what would happen if there was a right to veto and the government and the Treasury Select Committee reached a stalemate in the appointment of a new governor. And I think it's worth just exploring where that would leave us. The government, the Treasury, in a position where it is very unlikely to back down, and the Treasury Select Committee being determined about its view to uphold their right to veto, a right that would have been given to them from this very bill today. That could lead to uncertainty, creating turmoil in the markets, something that at the moment we know we need no more of, and certainly we can see what the experience of that kind of turmoil can create for international relationships as much as internal markets. It would lead to potentially to a loss in international confidence in the Bank of England and indeed the United Kingdom, something at the moment that we are benefiting from having. And the economic result of that would be untold economic chaos and damage. It's unlikely...
Give way on that point. I was just considering rather wondering what he thought about the process in America, where, for example, for Supreme Court appointments, there is this very lengthy process, and often people can wait for months and months without an appointment being made. I just wanted to know what he thought the repercussions that might be in this particular instance for our financial position.
My honourable friend makes a very good point, and I thought in making his point earlier this morning about the way the American system can create a situation of turmoil is a very, very valuable one. It's the very point I'm making now. And it also, I think, creates this issue, as the honourable friend, the member for Wimbledon, said earlier on, about it's not so much the problem of what we know a Treasury Select Committee and the honourable members who will go through this in a proper way will be doing in this House. It's the perception outside of that kind of turmoil and the perception that we have seen through the press and the way things have been dealt with in the United States and on other appointments that actually shows that it's what the public and actually the markets would think of this kind of impasse that would create the biggest problem, rather than what we know is going on in this House, particularly if there was a lengthy process. Happy to give way.
Thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. The use of the term turmoil, the lurid comparisons with the United States Congress endorses literally hundreds of appointments every year. The Treasury Select Committee has had confirmation appointments, and only on one occasion has it vetoed, and that's in a committee that has no buy-in because it's only a confirmation hearing. Isn't the reality that the so-called turmoil that the honourable gentleman is suggesting is vastly overstated?
That argument could have, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, but that's the same argument. This won't happen, it hasn't happened, therefore it won't happen, is the same argument somebody could have put some years ago about the financial turmoil in the Eurozone right now. To say something won't happen because it hasn't happened before is an argument that's been proven wrong, unfortunately, time and time again. And in America, I have to say, you do see quite regularly in the press in America and from the markets in America the argument that a particular appointment has been made, as was commented on by honourable friends earlier this morning, purely because that appointment is the appointment that will get through a committee, which is no disrespect to that successful applicant, but gives the impression, or can give the impression most crucially, that that appointment is a second choice. It's a choice, as I just heard, the most equally acceptable common denominator, rather than the person that the executive or any other body would have wanted. It's the person they can get through the door. And that in itself would detrimentally affect the individual's ability to have credibility and authority to be seen to do their job, let alone the chaos that could be incurred by international markets and our own markets if we did reach that kind of impasse here, where the Treasury Select Committee and the Treasury were set at loggerheads trying to decide on who a Bank of England governor would be for any prolonged period of time. I do appreciate that it is unlikely that an impasse would result in an unfulfilled post. It's almost unthinkable, but then, as we've seen in recent years, the unthinkable too often now can become the reality. I would hope in reality that the Treasury and the Select Committee would reach a compromise in extending the tenure of the incumbent governor, for example, until a successor was confirmed. But we all know, and some of us in this House before my time would have seen the experience of somebody who everybody knows is about to go, and how the authority wanes as soon as they know that they are about to go. Continued uncertainty, however, of who the next appointment would be, knowing that there is to be a new appointment but no decision on who it is and no sign to the end of an impasse, would damage the Bank of England's credibility in itself, which would be hugely detrimental to the role not just of the governor but the Bank of England itself in both our internal and our external markets. The constitutional quagmire that would be further exacerbated if the Treasury Select Committee adopted the procedure proposed indeed by the Institute of Government. After a Select Committee hearing with the proposed candidate, the Select Committee could deliberate before announcing their verdict. Then they would have the opportunity to call the Chancellor before the Select Committee to tell him why the nominated candidate was unsuitable, expecting him to justify why they should change their minds and agree with his proposal. And then we're into further deliberation before the Select Committee decides that they don't wish to change their mind. Potentially the appointment is then referred to this House for resolution. If after this lengthy process the original candidate is confirmed, there is no doubt that their credibility and authority is fatally undermined by the whole political ping-pong between the government and Parliament, let alone the trouble that will cause to the markets through whatever period of time of days, let alone weeks or indeed months that would go through whilst trying to fit in with parliamentary time. Even if the Treasury and the Select Committee could agree upon a compromise candidate quickly, and I think in this House we all know, not just with this morning's examples, what quickly can really mean, the new appointee would be undermined before they'd even taken up their post. The media would portray any second-choice candidate as not having the confidence of the Treasury, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, or the Government, or the Select Committee, whichever had originally been against their appointment. In those circumstances, what confidence would the wider banking and financial sector have that the new Bank of England Governor will be able to fulfil their role at the same time working closely with the government? Indeed, we also would be in a position, as I outlined in an intervention earlier, where potentially we are saying that the very Select Committee that scrutinises the role of the Bank of England and the Governor of the Bank of England is the committee that has appointed the Governor of the Bank of England. And again, I think there's a strong argument for that reason, to allow the Executive to appoint the executive-imbued role of the Governor and allow the Select Committee to fulfil their role of scrutinising and commenting on it, rather than having a Bank of England Governor who is answerable to that committee for their job in the first place. As I think was commented on earlier, we in this House know the integrity of members of Select Committees is strong enough, is good enough, is powerful enough to deal with that properly. But it's not necessarily what we in this House thinks that matters with the role of the Governor of the Bank of England. It's what the people outside this House think, what the markets think. It's the perception that becomes the reality. And we need the markets to have confidence and faith in the Governor and his ability and independence of everything that this House can scrutinise him with. And there is a question in terms of this bill of appointment, and we touched on this earlier, of why stop there? Why stop with the Governor of the Bank of England? The purported aim of this bill is to preserve the independence of the Governor of the Bank of England, to remove their appointment away from political considerations and pressure. I've made the argument, as have others already, that in fact it would do quite the opposite. But, as I say, why stop there? Surely, if there is a suspicion that the current system is sullied by political interference because the appointment is made up upon the recommendation of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, then the appointment of the Deputy Governor or any members of the Court of the Bank of England are likewise politically contaminated. And yet we hear little suggestion that their appointment process politically compromises their positions. In fact, these people act in themselves as a powerful check and balance within the Bank of England's internal governance structure to prevent any Governor of the Bank of England acting in a politically motivated way. And indeed, at the moment, does not have to act in a way where he is concerned about the views and role of those who appointed him on a Select Committee. There is also a substantial list of other public appointments made by Her Majesty the Queen following recommendation from the Prime Minister or other ministers. Perhaps the supporters of this bill could end up advocating as a matter going forward that those appointments be also made after the relevant Select Committees have had an opportunity to veto their recommendations or indeed make those appointments that are made currently by ministers. The Honourable Gentleman made the point just a few moments ago, in fact, that with the changes that have already happened, there is a drip-drip effect where we gradually see evolution of change around these kind of appointments. So if this bill were to go forward, then that would indicate a big jump, and therefore bigger and other jumps would follow. So perhaps members of the Culture and Media Select Committee, as has already been commented on, should have the ability and the opportunity to veto or choose the appointment of the Chairman, Vice Chairman or all other members of the BBC Trust. Perhaps members of the Defence Select Committee should also have an opportunity to veto the appointment of the Chief of the Defence Staff. Members of the Environment Select Committee, I have no doubt, would enjoy having the power to veto the Chairman of the Forestry Commission or any of the 10 other forestry commissioners, particularly in the current climate. But where should we stop? It is a valid question, and one, as I said earlier, that I think does deserve some time in this House potentially, and might well be a good issue for the Backbench Business Committee to put forward around the powers of veto of appointments that Select Committees have. But I don't think it is right for a single bill, for a single appointment in an executive power for a single Select Committee at this point, under a private member's bill, to be doing that. The Minister is here and has heard the views made, and no doubt will take those thoughts forward. So there is a valid question in terms of where we should stop. Should Parliament have the final say on the President of the Valuation Tribunal for England, or which judges are elevated to the Supreme Court, or even who is installed as the next Archbishop of Canterbury. The debate, I'm sure, would gain much interest in all sides of this House. These, however, as odd as some of these examples may be, these are all appointments made by Her Majesty following recommendations by her ministers. And I could list many more for many more minutes, but I can assure members they don't have to listen through that right now. They are all positions, indeed, where the holder has a responsibility for making decisions that affect people's lives. Happy to give one.
Isn't it odd, in fact, that one of the last acts of the previous government was to give the Prime Minister only one potential for recommendation to Her Majesty for the Archbishop of Canterbury, therefore effectively taking away from the government, as well as away from Parliament, a real choice over that role, and in fact therefore moving appointments away rather than towards the proposal that's on the table here.
I thank my honourable friend for making that intervention. It makes a very valid point that actually counteracts the argument made just a few moments ago around the continual drip to go in this direction. It highlights that actually that has not been happening. There have been some changes in some areas, but in others things have moved a different way, which may well be... And it's interesting as well that that decision was made by potentially the same member who decided to ignore the Treasury Select Committee not that long ago in their comments on an appointment of a a member of the Bank of England Committee. I think it is right that we have to be very clear about all of the positions I've noted are positions, as I said a few moments ago, where the holder has responsibility for making decisions affecting people's lives. It's been commented on a few times now, but there's a very clear and very precise line between that and the positions that the committees have been making, the Public Accounts Committee and the Treasury Select Committee with the OBR and the Comptroller, because they are a different type of role. They are scrutiny roles and statistic roles in those rights. They don't have executive powers to make decisions affecting people's lives. That's what we here in this House are elected to do through legislation ourselves and the appointments that flow from ministers. If we are to extend the right to veto, the appointment of one public official by us... Happy to give way.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way? The Office of Budget Responsibility has responsibility to bring forward an economic forecast. On the basis of that economic forecast, the government has to set out its public expenditure plans. That makes it an incredibly important body that can have significant influence on the direction that government economic policy takes.
Thank the honourable member for his intervention. It's a joy to be able to agree with him wholeheartedly. I think he makes a very, very good point. It also, I think, highlights and confirms the very argument that I'm making, that it makes forecasts. It doesn't have executive power to set monetary policy. The point he's just made is the government then, following those forecasts, will make executive decisions on how to move forward. Indeed, the Governor of the Bank of England may use executive powers in terms of their monetary powers and policy ability to make executive decisions, but there is a difference between that being a role that creates forecasts and scrutinises and the executive power that the government holds. Happy to...
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way yet again? The government, through the Chancellor, sets the inflation target for the Monetary Policy Committee. So it is the government that sets the benchmark. It is for the Governor and the Monetary Policy Committee to try and target that benchmark.
I thank the honourable member for further enhancing my point about where the executive power actually sits, as opposed to the scrutiny and forecasting role, as important as it is, but it is a very different role to the executive power that is wielded by a government and some of the executive bodies we're talking about. Because if we, and I will say, if we are to extend the right to veto the appointment of one public official by any given select committee, then the natural extension is to do so for other public appointments. In doing that, we would turn our select committee system and this House basically into a new form of executive recruitment agency. Our select committees indeed were established to scrutinise, to investigate, to consider, to report and to recommend. Principally, our select committee system is there to hold both the executive and other public officials and bodies to account. The select committee system was not created to veto the executive, neither was it envisaged that they would be used as quasi-recruitment advisors. we should be striving to make the Bank of England more accountable to Parliament. I have no disagreement with that. But we should be looking to do it without shackling its sovereignty, with more direct control over certain aspects by Parliament. Current concerns from our constituents about the Bank of England do not focus, and I certainly have not had in my case bag, any letters, let alone a deluge of letters, on how the Governor of the Bank of England is appointed. Any concerns that constituents may have about the Bank of England...
Give way on that point. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and I just wanted to hear his view on my suspicion that constituents simply want the Bank of England to do its job. They don't want this process politicised any more than it needs to be, and that a move towards a Treasury Select Committee veto would actually make it more political and less appealing to the very constituents that he's referred to in his speech.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and I agree wholeheartedly. When I'm talking to residents, and I had a business forum meeting just 10 days ago with businesses talking about the financial situation in our country, and they were very optimistic and very upbeat, but what they were talking to me about is what more can we do to make their job easier, to grow their businesses, create more jobs. Residents want to know what are we doing as a government to allow more jobs to be created and to match the skills with the jobs that are available. They're not talking to me about how we choose the Governor of the Bank of England. They actually do see a very clear differential, and following the interventions and the debate I've been enjoying with the honourable member about that line between the executive powers and the scrutiny powers, they very much see that it is the government's job to set policy that will allow our economy to grow, and they do not, therefore, I think, see, understand or have an interest in necessarily how the Governor of the Bank of England is appointed. They want to see that job being done properly, and this government setting out the economic policy correctly. Have to give way.
On the point that he's just making, is there a risk, therefore, that if the Treasury Select Committee is included in this process to the extent of having a veto, that ministerial responsibility could be blurred in terms of the appointment of the Governor of the Bank of England?
I think my honourable friend makes a very interesting point. It's not a point I was looking to make, and I hope he'll expand on that perhaps later this morning himself. But I do think actually he makes a very good point. I think as well as the risk of potentially having a Governor of the Bank of England, as I think I've hopefully outlined fairly graphically, that he's perceived to be a second choice or a lowest acceptable common denominator, there is also the risk that that politicisation in itself is part of the problem. And actually what we sometimes spend far too much time, and I think in this House in recent weeks we've had many people making the point that we should be focusing less on the process, which our residents are not interested in, but actually we should be focusing our time and effort in the result and how we deliver for our residents and deliver for our country. And I think an issue where we suddenly have a select committee having a power of appointment, again, moves a select committee away from its ability and its power and its credibility in actually scrutinising what the executive is doing to improve our country, while it's actually focusing on being part of the executive itself. And as I say, concerns our constituents may have about the Bank of England's role in the banking and financial sectors, particularly as it's prominent at the moment, and its role in banking and financial sectors, are that the decisions it makes are transparent. Any concerns our constituents have about the Bank of England's enhanced role under the Financial Services Bill focus on whether those functions are open to proper public scrutiny through Parliament. The inalienable political independence of the Bank of England is something that we as members of this House of Commons should, and I think we do, cherish, defend and uphold. When the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Right Honourable Member for Edinburgh South West, published his insider's account of the financial crisis that beset this country in 2008, I was alarmed at his suggestion that he considered overruling decisions made by the Governor of the Bank of England. He so seriously considered this course of action that he sought advice from Treasury officials to ascertain whether it was competent for him to do so as Chancellor of the Exchequer. If he had done so, the political uproar would have been enormous. The media and other commentators would have, and no doubt rightly could have, criticised a blatant attempt at political interference. In fact, as members will know, we had a debate along these lines just yesterday. I urge members to create no similar furore with this bill. This bill blatantly, in my opinion, attempts to assert direct parliamentary control over the appointment of the politically independent Governor of the Bank of England. This unnecessary interference potentially risks turning the appointment into a political football between the executive and the legislature, something that our financial markets certainly would not tolerate, would not see as a sensible way forward, and would go into complete, I believe, turmoil again. And our residents, our constituents, would not thank us for being the ones who put ourselves potentially in that position. The Honourable Member for Hayes and Harlington earlier today, I think, made the comment, I think I've made a note of a quote. He said that the Select Committee would be looking to seek consensus upon an appointment. The system we have now allows that to happen. The threat of a veto or the power to appoint, I think, moves in a very different direction. It moves to an executive role, and therefore it is an executive appointment. I think it would be a mistake for that House to go down this line. I think it is right that the Select Committees have that power to scrutinise, and we have to be very clear about where the line is between the ability to scrutinise and effectively comment as a critical friend and non-friend from time to time, and the ability to have a decision-making power in an executive role. That is something that rightly lies with the executive itself in this government. So I therefore oppose this bill.